And we're back with another Unsolved Mystery. I'm Namrata.
And I'm Nick.
Yeah, that is Nick. We just made some random noises.
I just said, of course, yeah.
Yeah, you did. Okay, so let me kind of set the
Scene.
scene, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, in the summer of 1947, a man named Kenneth Arnold, a businessman and a pilot, was flying near Mount Rainier. Rainier? I think it's Rainier. In Washington state when he reported seeing something strange in the sky.
Did he see you?
9 shiny, disc like objects flying in formation at an incredible speed. He kind of estimated that they were moving at over 1,200 miles per hour, which is literally faster than anything that was known in 1947, right? So he described their motion as resembling a saucer skipping across water. And just like that, the term flying saucer was born.
And only a few weeks later, something even more dramatic happened in Roswell, New Mexico. Reports basically came in like of a crash on a remote ranch. The U.S. Army first stated that they had recovered a flying disc, but only to revise their statement the next day and claim that it had been a weather balloon. A flying disc in a weather balloon.
Yep, they're literally the same thing.
Are they?
Yeah,
Yeah.
for the United States of
Yeah, yeah,
America, they are.
yeah.
I forgot.
Yeah. Um, so this retraction became one of the most infamous like government walkbacks or like cover-ups in US history, and it basically ignited the first wave of public suspicion that the military was basically covering something up.
I mean, if you had to give a lame excuse, maybe something that would look like a disc.
Yeah, like you could have been like, "Oh, this is one of the new weapons we're creating for against
Yeah, or oh
as
my
like
god,
military
someone's frisbee
defense."
flew too high. Like,
Mhm.
even that's a little bit more
Yeah. Okay.
believable. They had like someone had invented some different kind of
Yeah.
frisbee. And you're like, hey, that's there. But seriously, a
Yeah. Balloon.
weather balloon, yeah, sure. So, the late 1940s were already a time of extreme anxiety, right? Because World War II had just ended and the Cold War was beginning. So nuclear weapons had kind of already entered this conversation, and suddenly thousands of people across the country were reporting strange lights in the sky. Discs, triangles, silent craft, like flashing objects that moved at impossible speeds and defied the known laws of aerodynamics.
The US government just had to respond, and they did, right? So what followed was a sequence of official investigations under the United States Air Force, and which started with Project Sign in 1948, and then transitioned to Project
Grudge? You mean?
Grudge.
What's grunge?
It's like you've got alt and you've got grunge. It's like
It's
Y2K.
grudge. Grudge, you have a grudge. Grudge.
Oh, so Project Grudge.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And it finally evolved into the longest and most public, like acknowledged study of UFOs in American history, and it is known as Project Blue Book. It was active from 1952 to 1969.
So this wasn't a fringe effort. There was actually large-scale classified operations involving military pilots, intelligence officers, technicians, scientists, and basically a growing body of reports from civilians and service members alike. And Blue Book would obviously go into analyze over 12,000 UFO reports. Many were dismissed, but not all of them. Roughly 701 of those cases remain unexplained. Officially, they categorized as unidentified by the very agency tasked with explaining them.
Some of these unexplained cases involve radar contact and visual confirmation, while some involve multiple eyewitnesses, including police, pilots, and military personnel, and some left behind physical evidence. And yet, Project Blue Book was abruptly shut down in 1969, with the government stating that there was no UFO sighting investigated, like which posed any threat to national security, and there was no evidence to support the idea of an extraterrestrial technology.
But obviously, that answer never sat well with the public because For 2 decades, US Air Force had quietly treated UFO sightings as a legitimate matter of national defense. They collected data, conducted interviews, filed reports, and then when the pressure grew too intense, they just closed the door.
So, in this episode, we're going to examine exactly what Project Blue Book was, what it set out to do, what it found out, and what it left behind.
We'll begin with the historical backdrop that kind of led to its creation, starting with Roswell, the first wave of Cold War era sightings. I was going to say COVID.
Oh my god.
Cold War era sightings and the establishment of Project Sign. Because before Project Blue Book was public, it was something the government tried very hard not to talk about.
And did you hear that the guy who predicted COVID
Yeah,
said that there's a new virus
yeah,
in the UK and it's already started out in the UK?
yeah.
So, this is Unreal and Unsolved, the podcast where we dive into the eerie, the unexplained, and the downright bizarre. Then we take it a step further
People,
by
please
asking,
notice she started taking my things. I used to say this.
yeah, yes, you just didn't want to anymore.
I'd never said that. You just took it from me.
Do you want to say it?
No, go ahead.
Um, no, you can say it.
No, it's
Yeah.
okay. Go ahead. It's
Mm.
yours.
No, it's mine.
Yeah.
It's gonna be Pebbles next. Right. So we take it a step further by asking, what if reality isn't what we think? So this is episode 13, Project Blue Book and UFO cover-ups. Declassified.
To understand Project Blue Book, we have to actually kind of go back, not just to the 1950s, but to the precise moment that unidentified flying objects entered the American consciousness. And that moment came in 1947.
Yeah. So like we mentioned previously, um, pilot Kenneth Arnold, right? He saw these flying discs and they were flying at the speed over like 1,200 miles per hour, and this is beyond anything publicly available at the time, and said that moved in a way that no aircraft should be moving.
So this whole report, right, was quite covered by the press, and that's when this whole obsession with flying saucers started. And like we said, that in New Mexico, there was another rancher named Mac Brazel who kind of discovered debris scattered across his property, and he reported the sheriff, who passed it to the nearby Roosevelt Army Airfield.
So what happens next is now infamous. On July 8th, 1947, the army issued a press release stating that they'd recovered the wreckage of a flying disc. That announcement was quickly retracted the next day and was replaced with a statement saying that the debris was from a weather balloon, like we said. But the story disappeared for decades until it resurfaced in the late 70s, reigniting theories of a government cover up.
And while the Roosevelt story would take years to enter the UFO mainstream, right, it had a significant impact on the military at that time because the United States Air Force was newly formed, and there was this whole post-war years that were filled with rumor, sighting, anxieties, and nuclear arms race was escalating. Cold War was beginning, and just more and more people, both civilians and trained military personnel, were reporting just strange objects in the sky.
So, in January 1948, the Air Force created a classified program to evaluate the phenomenon, right? It was called Project Sign. So it was headquartered at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. Sign was tasked with collecting, cataloging, and evaluating UFO reports.
What was that tune? Sign.
Are you judging me for speaking now?
I'm not judging. I'm just saying why you went sign. Start singing.
I can't even say anything without you judging me. It's crazy. But these reports at the time, like the UFO reports and stuff like that, they were referred to as flying disc or aerial phenomena.
And interestingly, the analysis of Project Sign was initially taken, the sightings were quite seriously taken, right? Internal memos from 1948 show that some staff considered the possibility that UFOs could represent extraterrestrial technology. And in fact, now a lost document known as the Estimate of the Situation, reportedly drafted by science personnel, allegedly concluded that the most plausible explanation for some sighting was interplanetary origin.
So that document was said to have reached the desk of Air Force Chief of Staff General Hoyt Vanderberg, who was not impressed. And according to declassified testimony, he rejected the conclusion, stating that there was insufficient evidence. And shortly after, the estimate was allegedly destroyed, and the tone of Project Sign changed dramatically.
So by the end of 1948, Project Sign had been effectively shut down and replaced with Project Grudge. And the goal shifted, right? Because now instead of open investigations, the new program focused on debunking UFO reports, interpreting them as natural phenomena, misidentification, or basically psychological delusions.
This pivot just marked the beginning of a pattern, one of internal interest and concern, followed by public dismissal. The military basically wanted to avoid panic, but it also wanted to understand what people were seeing because some of the sightings involved radar returns, physical trace evidence, and pilots describing unknown objects maneuvering at impossible speeds.
So, meanwhile, the number of UFO reports was skyrocketing. Between 1947 and 1952, sightings became so frequent that they could no longer be ignored, even as the government publicly downplayed them. The press kept covering them, civilians kept reporting them, and occasionally, commercial military pilots refused to stay silent.
By 1952, public interest had reached a fever pitch. That summer, a series of UFOs was spotted over Washington, D.C., visually confirmed by both civilian observers and radar operators at Washington National Airport and Andrews Air Force Base. Fighter jets were scrambled. The objects just disappeared, then returned. It was such a serious event that President Truman reportedly demanded an explanation.
And that was kind of the final push. So on March 1952, the Air Force reconstructed its UFO program again, and this time into a long term investigation that they called Project Blue Book. And it would remain in operation for the next 17 years. So, when Project Blue Book officially began in March of 1952, it wasn't launched in secret, right? At least not entirely. Unlike Project Sign or Grudge, Blue Book was public facing in many ways. It had a name, it issued press statements, and it kind of responded to citizen reports.
But that doesn't mean it was open. While it had public veneer, the actual mechanisms of the project remained highly controlled, operating from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio and under the oversight of the United States Air Force.
So, the stated goals of Project Blue Book were threefold. One was to determine if UFOs pose a threat to US national security. Two, to scientifically analyze UFO related data. And three, to investigate and explain reports of unidentified aerial phenomena.
By the time it ended in 1969, Blue Book collected 12,618 UFO reports. Of those, the vast majority, over 90%, were examined and misidentified aircrafts, weather events, balloons, astronomical events, or hoaxes. But, and this is the key, and this is not the key, it's just key. It's like important information, right? Um, at least 701 cases remain officially unexplained.
So, kind of let's break down how it worked. So, Project Blue Book was led by a series of officers, but one of the most significant figures was Captain Edward J. Ruppelt. He took over leadership in 1952 and brought a sense of structure and professionalism to the investigation process. Ruppelt is also credited with coining the term UFO, unidentified flying object, to replace this whole media driven phase that was going on of flying saucer.
So under Rupert, the project established a standardized protocol. Sightings were logged, witnesses interviewed, and cases evaluated on criteria such as the credibility of the observer, supporting physical evidence, radar confirmation, and flight patterns. Rupert even consulted with scientists, most notably Dr. J. Allen Hynek. I hate when that happens. Do you know when you want to sneeze but it doesn't come out?
Yeah.
Yeah, that just happened. I think I'm allergic to Dr. Allen Hynek. But he was an astronomer who would later become one of the most important figures in UFO history.
Like if you see like till now, right?
Yeah.
The way Rupel kind of held everything
Mm.
did seem like the right way, right? It seemed like either we would get like a proper answer to everything that's happening,
Yeah.
or we would literally get to know what it is, right? There wouldn't be like any kind of error or
Yeah.
thing because hey, he seems to be following a really good process. Witnesses are interviewed, they're being logged, all the sightings are logged, and I feel like it would have worked if
Yeah.
maybe just stayed this way. So now that we come back, so like coming back to Dr. Hynek. So at first, Dr. Hynek was skeptical. Like his job was to provide scientific explanations for sightings, and early on, he kind of saw most of them as misidentifications. But as the years progressed, he kind of began to start noticing patterns, cases that kind of defied logic, and incidents that involved radar and multiple observers. So by the time Blue Book ended, Hynek had become one of the most vocal critics of the project's dismissive stance.
It's important to understand the scale of Blue Book. Cases came from all 50 states, from military personnel, commercial airplane pilots, law enforcement, and civilians. And each report included forms, interviews, sometimes drawing of and photos, and if available, radar data or physical samples.
And despite this thoroughness, many critics argue that the project developed a bias towards debunking rather than investigating. And over time, Blue Book was increasingly used to calm public fears and minimize media attention rather than pursue the truth of literally how it started, right? So even Rupert, who was once a committed director, grew frustrated with how the program was managed after he left in 1953. So he literally stayed for 1 year.
Like, what did he find out in that 1 year? So one telling example is the way high-profile cases were handled. Sightings which involved multiple eyewitnesses, pilot confirmations, or physical trace evidence were often explained with seemingly thin reasoning, such as atmospheric invasion, stars seen through the haze, or optical illusion, and swamp gas, right? That it's a term that Hynek himself would later regret using after it was widely mocked.
In fact, Hynek actually shifted from skeptic to believer in one of the most fascinating arcs in the entire Blue Book narrative. He later said that the Air Force was not interested in finding UFOs, they were interested in explaining them away. And that shift in tone from investigation to public relation would come to define the second half of the project's existence.
It was also worth noting that many in the intelligence community, including the CIA and NSA, showed increasingly interest. Showed increasingly interest. Did I say that right?
Increasing interest.
Increasingly. Oh my God, yeah, increasing interest in unidentified aerial phenomena during the 1950s and 60s. While Project Blue Book was the Air Force's official investigation, it wasn't the only one happening. Other classified efforts were monitoring Soviet technology, advanced aerospace threats, and very likely things that, the public never heard about.
And despite the sole public facing nature of the Blue Book, many files remain classified for years, even decades. And it wasn't until 1976 that most of the Blue Book case files were declassified and transferred to the National Archives. And even then, some names and details were redacted, suggesting that certain sightings involved sensitive technology or witnesses the government still did not want revealed.
So, what did Blue Book actually accomplish? So, it created the largest single archive of UFO reports in US history. It introduced standardized reporting procedures, and it helped shape how both the public and the government viewed the UFO phenomena.
But also minimized. It dismissed, and in some cases, distorted reports that didn't fit the official narrative, right? It was part investigation and part containment strategy.
Coming up next, we're going to dive into some of the most compelling and unexplained cases from the Blue Book files, like incidents that involved credible witnesses, radar contact, and sightings that seem to remain unresolved to this day.
So Project Blue Book cataloged over 12,000 cases, right? Like we said. And while many were explained as weather balloons, aircrafts, or hoaxes, or basically anything else that didn't make sense, a significant number were never solved. So now we're looking at some of those well documented and still unexplained cases in the Blue Book's history. These are not rumors, these are the reports that were filed, analyzed, and then kind of left unresolved by the US Air Force.
So we'll focus on phone, the phone, the four.
Aren't we all focusing on the phone nowadays?
That is true.
And she dropped her mic.
Great. So we're gonna focus on the one, two, three, four, four, number four standout incidents, right? So you've got the 1952 Washington D.C. sightings. You've got the Mantle incident. You've got the Lubbock lights. Lubbock?
Lubbock? I'm not sure.
Yeah, and then you've got the Red Bluff case in California. So these cases involved trained observers, radar confirmation, and physical evidence, and they pushed Project Blue Book to its limits.
So let's start with the first one, right? The 1952 Washington D.C. UFO wave. So this kind of the most dramatic UFO incident of the Blue Book era. Okay, in July 1952, a series of UFOs were sighted and tracked on radar over the national capital. Not once, but twice on consecutive weekends.
Air Force traffic controllers at Washington National Airport and Andrews Air Force Base reported fast moving, unidentifiable objects moving across their radar screens. Some were visually confirmed by pilots and ground observers. When fighter jets scrambled, the objects disappeared only to reappear when the jets returned to base.
So this was not an isolated event. It involved multiple radar stations, civilian and military personnel, and visual confirmation. At one point, the radar operator said the objects moved at speeds estimated to over 7,000 miles per hour. And that was kind of impossible in 1952.
So the
I mean, the
incident.
last we heard was 1,200,
Yeah,
but this is 7,000.
yeah. I wish I could go at 7,000 miles per hour.
Can you imagine, like, we just reach places that fast?
Yeah, in like seconds.
Yeah.
Maybe
And we
minutes.
just, like,
Yeah.
cross countries and
Oceans.
wow,
You
it'd
could
be
literally
so
walk
good.
across the ocean at that speed. Okay,
So
so
cool.
scientists are so obsessed right now with like cloning and like the viruses that are gonna come. Bro, why don't you make a genetic mutation which can make me move at 7,000 miles per hour?
Because if there's something we've learned from Flash,
Mhm.
is that to move that fast, you need. I feel like once that starts, and there'll be shortage of food in the world because people have to eat so
Constant food.
much
But
to
also,
kind
wouldn't
of.
it also reduce global warming and stuff like that? Because you're not using cars anymore.
But you are kind of messing up with the food chain, aren't you? Because there's more demand for
Yeah.
food than there is supply,
Yeah, but like
which
they
kind of we
should.
already are in right now.
Yeah.
And now, if you're gonna like make everyone move at 7,000 miles
Okay,
per
yeah,
hour,
but then they can modify it to make us like not affect our appetite.
yeah, how is that? Where are we getting the energy from? We should start having
Air.
solar heaters on us because it's
Yeah,
anyway so hot.
something like that. Or like air. You breathe in oxygen and you get powered up.
That is so advanced.
Yeah.
And just I don't think maybe now it feels impossible. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe in 100 or 200 years it would be
Not even like a
literally.
like couple like 50 years.
Maybe that's literally the way the world will go on.
Yeah.
My God, can you
But
imagine?
we'll be there. We're not that old.
100
I said
years?
50.
Okay.
My god.
50, yeah, we'll be up. But 100 years? No way.
We'll be here for 70 as well, I think.
I don't know if I'll be here for 70.
You'll be like 90.
I'll be 98.
Yeah.
No, I'm not 28.
Yeah, that was like, what? Huh?
I'm 26. It's not a huge difference.
I'd be like 90 years? I'd be like,
You'll be 85.
isn't that 70 years?
You're 15.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that would be like 70 years. Yeah,
Sorry, guys. I got a call. I'm sorry. And I've completely lost my train of thought.
7,000 miles per hour.
Yeah, but then,
Oh, we're talking about.
yeah. Okay, anyway, the point is that I don't think it's economical to go 7,000 miles per hour. Do any genetic modification for it.
Really?
Yeah.
Um, maybe it is.
I don't know. I'm not so sure.
Hmm.
Anyway, can we get back?
We're talking about the Washington thing, yeah?
Yeah.
1952.
Yeah.
So, and how they were spotted at consecutive weekends,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, no, that was before. No, we got caught about the 7,000 miles,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, yes, President guy, Harry Truman, right? So, this incident of it flying at 7,000 miles and stuff like that caused such a stir, right? That Harry Truman reportedly asked for an explanation, and the Air Force eventually blamed temper-
Temperature?
temperature inversions, and like which is a weather phenomenon that causes radar anomalies. But many experts, like including some involved in the case, disagreed with that conclusion.
So, despite the Air Force statement, the incident left quite a mark, right? Because it remains one of the most credible and heavily documented mass UFO sightings in the US history.
She just
Oh,
like she
sorry.
was trying to pet a dog,
Oh, my baby.
but then she like pushed her head down
Hi, baby.
and made her like slip
Hi, baby. You want to say hi? She says hi, guys.
by licking the mic.
Move on.
Oh,
Oh, I love you too, my baby.
oh, okay. So let's talk about the second little thing the blue book discovered. Right. So you've got the Mantle incident, 1948. Um, let's go back to like the early days of Project Sign, to an event that ended like in tragedy. Right. So on January 7, 1948, Captain Thomas Mantle, the Kentucky Air National Guard pilot, was dispatched to pursue a reported UFO over Fort Knox.
And Mantle and three other pilots were were flying F-51 Mustangs. So the witnesses on the ground had reported a large metallic object hovering in the sky. So Mantle pursued it, climbing to over
Climbing over May.
basically maybe over 20,000 feet and then crashed shortly afterwards.
So the official explanation was that Mantle may have lost consciousness due to oxygen deprivation, deprivation at a high altitude. But as for the UFO itself, the Air Force said that it was likely a skyhook balloon, which was a classified project at the time.
So, but the explanation was offered months later, right? After public pressure demanded answers. For a long time, this was considered the first military death linked to a UFO chase. It rattled the public and it rattled the military more,
And then we've got the Lubbock lights, right? So in
which
late,
is the third sighting we're talking about.
yeah, so this is in 1951. In late August 1951, dozens of people in Lubbock, Texas, including college professors, reported seeing a formation of bluish white lights crossing the sky in a boomerang shaped pattern.
Witnesses described this light as fast moving, silent, and flying in perfect formation. The incident gained credibility after a college student captured a photograph, which was
Photography.
which was analyzed and later included in the Blue Book files.
Pebble thinks that the mic is something to eat because she's been following it with her eyes. So the Air Force investigated but couldn't like offer a consistent explanation. They suggested plovers, right, which is a type of bird reflecting street lights, But the witnesses, including physics and engineering professors, firmly rejected that theory.
So, in the end, the Lubbock lights were marked as unexplained. Even decades later, investigators reviewing the case say it remains one of the most credible mass sightings on record.
And then we've got the fourth, the Red Bluff incident in 1960. It happened in California where two highway patrol officers reported a close encounter with an unidentified object.
So, on the night of August 13th, August officers Charles Carson and Stanley Scott, oh my god, CCNSS,
My
saw a massive glowing object moving silently across the sky. So he described it as an oblong with rotating red lights and claimed it moved with unnatural speed and agility. Do you know that, Pep?
That's so cute. But they attempted to pursue the object in their patrol car, but it outpaced them easily. And then hovered, ascended, and then disappeared. And multiple other witnesses reported the same object that night.
The Air Force explanation, which I think all of us cannot wait for, reflected light from the planet Venus and nearby forest fires. But the officers were adamant. This was not a celestial body. It moved. It changed attitude. It responded, you idiots.
My God!
Venus.
Reflected light from
Planet
Venus.
Venus and forest fires conspired against humans. They joined forces to look like a UFO because we people are stupid.
So they submitted official reports despite the Air Force's claims, but the Red Bluff case was never like conclusively resolved, right? Even skeptics consider it one of the most persuasive law enforcement encounters in UFO history.
So across all of these cases and many more in the Blue Book archives, we see a common theme, don't we?
Blue book, blue book, blue book, blue.
Credible witnesses, inconsistent explanations because Venus is amazing, and
And weather
patterns,
balloons.
yeah, and patterns of behavior that defy traditional errors, space logic.
NOCs?
What?
Did you say NOCs?
Aerospace.
Ah, I was so confused. But these cases are why Project Blue Book remains such a fascinating chapter in UFO history. But not because they solved the mystery, but because they couldn't.
So coming up next, we explore the public and political pressure surrounding the Blue Book. And what was this pressure that they had to use Venus and forest fires conspiring? Do you think they had a meeting late at night? Venus is like, hey, the forest, can we have a conversation? The forest is moved. Yes, tell me, Venus. Oh my god, this is going cry crazy. Forget
Okay,
it.
okay, okay. Let's play it out.
Forget it. No,
Let's
no,
play it
no,
out.
no,
You
no.
can be
We are
Venus.
not.
I'll be the forest.
Oh, we are not doing this.
Okay.
Okay.
So
So,
Venus,
like I
Venus
said,
dialogue
so
goes
we
like
explore the public and
Venus's.
political pressure surrounding Blue Book in the 1960s and how a scientific committee known as the Condon, I'm so sorry, led to its shutdown and what the government said in its final statement. Now maybe they did Uranus, or maybe Neptune seemed more likely, or maybe just Earth is crazy because they are the most sane, so sane that they could see. I'm pretty sure they, in all of their surveillance, they caught Venus and forests having conversations, and they're like, "Oh my God, they conspired." I hate it. How can you say Venus? Light reflected from Venus, and just forest fires just made everything red. So I'm sorry. Like that's all that happened.
Oh my God.
So crazy. By the early 1960s, the Project Blue Book was quite under pressure from all sides. The number of sightings were growing, the public was becoming more curious and more skeptical within the Air Force. Many saw the project as more of a liability than a solution. You think the public was skeptical? Venus, it seems.
um,
I will not get over that.
Internally, so internally, the morale within Blue Book had just dropped because of Venus, and investigators were frustrated because of Venus. And many believed that the project had become a little more than like a public relations tool, and it focused on explaining away sightings rather than pursuing real inquiry. Even Dr. J. Allen Hynek, the scientific advisor that we mentioned earlier, had shifted from debunker to critic, and he openly questioned whether Blue Book was fulfilling its mission.
Meanwhile, the public and scientific communities were asking bigger questions, right?
Why would did they use Venus?
Why were so many reports being brushed off? Why were credible sightings from military pilots, commercial airlines, and radar operators not being studied with more urgency? And to address this growing concern, the US Air Force turned to academia because astrology was giving up on them.
So in 1966, they commissioned a study from the University of Colorado, led by physicist Dr. Edward Condon, and the goal was to evaluate whether there was any scientific merit to continuing this study of UFOs, and the study would become known as the Can Condon report. Condon.
The panel reviewed a select number of Blue Book cases, not all of them, just a curated sample.
Every time you say blue book, I think you say the book. Like, the spirit boxes.
Mhm.
So I'm like, what is she saying?
Some were previously unexplained, others had already been debunked. So the team analyzed three reports over 2 years and released their findings in 1968.
So the conclusion, right? That further investigation of UFOs was not scientifically useful, and that most sightings could be attributed to to known phenomena
Venus.
or like insufficient data. The report stated that nothing has come from the study of UFOs in the past 21 years
Except Venus,
that has added to scientific knowledge.
because we know Venus. So the Air Force accepted the findings. Obviously, they did. What do they care? Venus is always there. And on December 17th, 1969, that rhymed, didn't it?
Yeah, it is.
I didn't mean for it to. And on December 17, 1969, they officially terminated Project Blue Book. So the final public statement was clear. I think we should all hear this with a lot of seriousness, okay? No UFO reported, investigated, and evaluated by the Air Force was ever an indication of threat to national security.
But Venus was.
There was no evidence that sightings represented technological developments. You think Venus did it. You think you would understand technological advancements or principles beyond the range of present day scientific knowledge. There were no evidence of sightings that were extraterrestrial vehicles. End of report.
Yeah, that was it, right? After 22 years, the official investigation of UFOs by the US Air Force was over.
It took them 24 years to look into the sky and
22.
notice. Sorry. It took them 22 years to look into the sky and notice Venus. 22.
The files, or at least the ones that weren't classified, were transferred to the National Archives. Project Blue Book, as a public entity, was closed.
But almost immediately, this report was criticized, right? Not just by UFO believers, but by scientists. Every member of the Condon Committee came forward saying the investigation had been biased. Documents later revealed that Condon had made dismissive comments about UFO research before the study even began, raising serious concerns about the objectivity of the entire process.
And obviously, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, in particular, was deeply critical. He argued that the Condon Committee had ignored the most compelling cases, had not included specialists in relevant fields like radar or aviation, and had essentially been designed to provide justification for ending public investigation.
And Hynek would go on to found the Center for UFO Studies and become one of the most respected voices in civilian UFO research. He believed that the government had not solved the mystery, only stepped away from it publicly.
Bro, what does it say if the dude that was investigating the UFOs goes and creates a bigger center for UFO studies?
It says that Venus, there's more to it than Venus.
The joke's over. It's done.
I'm not joking, I'm so annoyed.
Yeah, I know.
At not a single point it was a joke. It's so stupid to be like, the reflected light from Venus is making you see UFOs.
And this raises bigger questions, right? The J. Allen Hynek thing. If the Air Force shut down Blue Book took wide public interest, did the government really stop investigating, or did it simply move the work into classified programs just out of public view?
So, coming up next, we look at what came after Blue Book, from modern military UFO encounters to leaked Pentagon programs. Because while Blue Book ended in 1969, the sightings didn't,
In fact, they became more compelling than ever.
and Venus still remained there
Oh my god.
to prove to the world that it was innocent. You're so done with me.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for anyone else who's done with me, but I'm offended for Venus. I'm here, Venus's
Venus, planet of love.
spokesperson, the spokesperson for Venus,
Yeah.
reporting for duty.
Yeah, I don't think it wants you.
Thanks. Look at the jump with your laugh.
Thanks.
Devil laugh.
Venus,
Witch laugh.
planet of love. Do you support
Da-da-da-da.
love?
Da-da-da-da.
Do you support love?
So, Project Blue Book was officially shut down in 1969, and obviously, the message was clear. The US government had looked into the UFOs, found no evidence of a threat or extraterrestrial origin, and had no reason to continue investigating. But that wasn't the end of the story. Not by a long shot.
Because while the Air Force stepped back publicly, sightings didn't stop because people have eyes.
And Venus was still in the sky.
Pilots continued to report unidentifiable objects, and civilians kept seeing
Can I ask you a
strange.
question?
Yes,
Like, out of the thing.
yes.
We say unidentified. Why do you always say unidentifiable? I mean, meaning is the same. I'm just
Yeah.
asking why, as a personal preference, you don't say unidentified, you say unidentifiable.
Because they haven't identified, it's like kind of past tense in my head,
It is.
right?
It had happened, but you couldn't
So,
identify it.
yeah, but unidentifiable, it's like not identified till date in my head. I don't know, maybe it's just a me thing.
Yeah, because I know you. It's not like once you said unidentified one. It's you choose to say unidentifiable every single time.
Yeah, because it's very much like till this date it has not been identified.
Okay.
Unidentified
Yeah.
is very much like, oh, at that date it wasn't, but maybe now it is. I don't know, it's just my head. It's weird, right? So, pilots continue to report unidentified objects, and civilians kept seeing strange crafts, and quietly behind the scenes, the US government continued to take note, even if they didn't admit it.
And one of the clearest signs that UFO investigations never truly ended came decades later in the form of a program that most Americans didn't hear about till 2017.
Oh.
It was actually the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or AATIP.
A AATIP. AATIP is what I'm gonna call it. Yeah?
Okay.
Yeah? Okay. So AATIP was a secretive Pentagon program first funded in 2007 and championed by Senator Harry Reid, then Senate Majority Leader, right? And Its goal was to identi- was to ident- was to investigate. Sorry. So it was to investigate unidentifiable like aerial phenomena, UAPs, which is actually unidentified aerial phenomena.
You mean UAPs?
UAPs. What did I say?
UAPS.
Did I say UPS?
No, you said UAPS.
UAPS. Oh my god.
It's UAPs.
Yeah, UAPs. Sorry. UPS, unique selling point. So
That's USP.
oh my god. Oh my god. This is crazy. Um, but UAPs is like a modern rebranding of the term UFOs with a broader, more defense-oriented focus.
For nearly a decade, AATIP operated within the Department of Defense, analyzing military encounters, interviewing pilots, and collecting data, including classified footage of strange objects filmed by US Navy fighter jets.
And in December 2017, three videos, three of those videos were leaked and then officially confirmed, known as the Fleur,
Fleur.
Fleur,
There's no L.
FLI,
Fleur.
sorry,
It's Fleur.
Fleur, Gimbal, GIMBAL, and Go Fast videos that they basically show objects with no visible propulsion 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 systems moving at incredible speeds and executing maneuvers beyond the capabilities of any known aircraft.
And these weren't civilian sightings, right? They were military recordings taken with advanced tracking systems by trained fighter pilots who described the objects as not of this world. And for the first time in decades, the US government had no immediate answers.
The release of these videos reignited global interest in government UFO research. Media outlets began covering the story seriously, and congressional committees started asking questions. And then, in 2020, the Pentagon officially acknowledged that the objects in these videos were unidentifiable and that they were still being investigated.
I'm pretty sure they took those 2 years to figure out another planet
Three.
to blame on. Sorry, three. They were like, okay, we've used Venus too much. What else can we
Oh
use?
my god. Oh my god, you're stuck on the planet.
Then in 2021, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released a long awaited preliminary report on UAPs. It examined 144 military encounters between 2004 to 2021. And here's what it found. Out of the 144, 143 of those could not be explained. Some involved objects demonstrating unusual behavior patterns or flight characteristics, and a few appeared to involve technologies beyond current US or foreign capabilities.
Capabilities. So, in short, the mystery had returned, and this time, guess what? It was harder to dismiss.
So that same year, the US Department of Defense established a new task force, the UAP Task Force, later replaced by the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO.
Arrow.
Its mission was to standardize reporting, collect data across agencies, and evaluate whether these phenomena represent a national security risk.
So, what we're seeing now isn't just a renewed public interest in UFOs, it's a formal, bureaucratic acknowledgement that something is in the sky, that the military doesn't know what it is, and that it hasn't stopped since the days of Project Blue Book.
Which begs the question, if Blue Book officially ended and these sightings never stopped, did the government simply change the name, the funding line, and the secrecy level while continuing the same work all along?
That's exactly what many believe, and explains why so many people still see Project Blue Book as the first phase of a much longer investigation, one that continues today, just with different labels.
So, in the next segment, we're exploring kind of what all of this means, right? What was this Blue Book really about, and how should we understand government secrecy, public trust, and other search for answers that still haven't come.
Because whether we're talking about sources in 1947 or thermal footage in 2023, the real question hasn't changed. What are we not being told?
It's not Venus.
It's Neptune this time!
Can't wait for that. So when Project Blue Book closed its doors in December 1969, right, the message that we got was that the UFOs were not a threat, threat. They did not demonstrate advanced or unknown technology, and there was no evidence of extraterrestrial origin. So the case, they said, was closed.
Um, but what the records actually show tells a very different story. Because while Blue Book attempted to project certainty, its files were filled with ambiguity and
What a cutie.
hundreds of cases that investigators simply just couldn't explain.
And it's worth remembering that these reports didn't come from fringe sources. They came from fighter pilots, commercial airline crews, law enforcement officers, scientists, radar specialists, and government officials. And in many cases, these sightings involved multiple witnesses, simultaneous radar and visual confirmation, and objects displaying capabilities far beyond what was possible at the time.
And yet, over time, Blue Book
Sorry for that minor disruption. She dropped her iPad.
You made me drop my iPad.
I don't know. There's no proof or anything.
Kill yourself.
Venus didn't see us.
Oh my god. Oh my
Right, you were
god.
saying ambiguity.
Was I saying ambiguity?
Yes, you were.
Ew. No, I was not. I was talking about how um over time Blue Book increasingly leaned towards dismissal
Oh, yeah.
over
Sorry.
investigation. So like instead of saying, hey, we don't know what it is, many reports were closed with explanations such as Venus,
Da 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 doom.
temperature inversion, light reflected off birds, a balloon, possibly, and insufficient data to continue.
So the tendency
Wait, sorry,
towards
before you go on, the last question reference.
the tendency towards
Okay.
easy.
Have you not read
Sorry.
the last question?
No,
By, I think, Isaac something?
no.
Okay.
That tendency towards easy dismissal frustrated even those inside the program, right? As you mentioned earlier, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, originally hired to provide scientific explanation, became one of the most vocal critics of Blue Book's conclusions. And he came to believe that the government wasn't trying to solve the UFO mystery, it was trying to make it go away. Poof.
Poof. So, the reference I was making about insufficient data is the last question. It's a short story by Isaac Asimov. It's really interesting. I love it. But going back to you guys should read it. It's really short. But um, the mystery did not go away,
Did not go poof.
girl. Even when Blue Book shut down and like sightings continued. Even when Blue Book shut down, the sightings still continued, and people kept reporting like strange crafts, bright lights, erratic movement patterns, and radar anomalies. And if anything, public perception grew that the government was simply shifting these investigations out of the public eye.
Because let's not forget, right? Even as Blue Book operated, there were other intelligence programs running in parallel, focused on aerospace surveillance, enemy technology, and yes, unidentified phenomena. Some of these programs were highly classified, and many researchers believe that the Blue Book functioned in part as a public facing cover, while most sensitive investigations happened behind the scenes.
The closure of Blue Book also introduced a major cultural shift by publicly stating that UFOs weren't real. or at least weren't important, the government sent a signal to anyone who continued asking questions that were indulging in pseudosciences.
You mean that the public sent the signal?
Huh?
The public sent signal that anyone who asked questions was. Anyway, you did not. You kind of messed that up. But I made it clear, it's fine. So that shift delegitimized serious study, right? Because it caused academic institutions to avoid the topic. It caused journalists to treat it as a joke, and it marginalized credible witnesses, many of whom were military veterans and technical experts.
So here's what Project Blue Book did accomplish though. Like it built the most extensive government database of UFO encounters ever compiled. It created patterns and timelines that researchers still study today. It documented the tension between secrecy and science in the modern age, and it showed us that when public institutes say there's nothing to see here, they might just be buying time.
And more than that, it left behind a central paradox. If UFOs are truly meaningless, then why collect over 12,000 reports, employ scientists, and classify large portions of the data? And if they're not meaningless, why did the government stop investigating publicly?
In the end, Project Blue Book may not have been the end of UFO research, but the end of public trust in how those investigations were handled.
Because it reveals something deeper than just sightings. It revealed the line between secrecy and safety, between science and strategy. And that line is always not clear, right? And the government has long preferred to operate in that space ambiguity.
And maybe that's the real legacy of Blue Book. It didn't prove aliens exist, but it didn't prove that they don't, right? It proved that our understanding of what's flying in our skies is still very incomplete.
Which is more complete. Actually, what we are more complete with is what we know about Venus. Yeah, okay, that's the last Venus thing I'm saying. I think I'm over it now. While the United States ran Project Blue Book, it wasn't the only country grappling with unexplained aerial encounters. In fact, during the same decades, governments around the world were quietly and sometimes openly running their own UFO programs.
Some of them were far more transparent than the US, others were even more secretive. But the point is clear, UFOs weren't just an American concern. They were, and still are, a global phenomenon.
So let's start with the United Kingdom. The British Ministry of Defense ran an official UFO desk from 1950s to 2009. They investigated thousands of sightings from military reports to civilian cases and compiled intensive files, many of which have now been declassified.
In fact, between 2007 and 2013, the UK's National Archives released over 60,000 pages of UFO related documents. They included reports of radar confirmed sightings, pilot encounters, and letters between top defense officials questioning whether the public should be told the full story.
And then there's France, which in some way has taken a more scientific approach than any other government. In 1977, the French space agency CNES established GAPAN, GEIPAN, a unit dedicated to investigating aerospace phenomena. This unit is still active today and publicly releases case summaries online.
And what's unique about the unit is that it's not just a military tool, it involves civilian scientists, astronomers, and aviation experts. Their data shows that roughly 20 to 25% of their cases remain unexplained, often involving well documented multi witness events.
In Russia, formerly the Soviet Union, things were more opaque. During the Cold War, the USSR, we love the USSR, ran multiple classified UFO programs, often overlapping with the defense and aerospace surveillance.
And after the fall of the Soviet Union, some former officials confirmed the existence of UFO files.
One,
And one
sorry,
high ranking general claimed that the Soviet military tracked hundreds of incidents. and that in some cases entire military bases were placed on alert.
What I was trying to say is that why? Just why?
Why what?
USSR? First
Yeah,
they lose astronauts
yeah,
and then they hide their UFO programs.
yeah,
And people who have, after they fall, have to come out and be like,
yeah,
oh, we did this.
yeah. Just yeah, just I've given up on them.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay. Meanwhile, in Brazil, the Air Force openly admits to having investigated UFOs since the 1950s. One of those most famous incidents, the Night of the UFO, 1986, involved 21 objects tracked by radar, visually confirmed by multiple pilots, and pursued by fighter jets. The Brazilian Air Force even held a press conference the next day.
To this day, Brazil continues to declassify files related to these sightings, sometimes with very little reduction in contrast to the US's practices.
Even in Chile, the government created CEFAA, an official committee to investigate anomalous aerial phenomena. Their approach has been open and science driven, with reports shared with the public and unexplained sightings acknowledged without shame.
So when we talk about UFO secrecy, we're not just talking about the United States, right? It's about how different governments handle the same mystery, some with transparency, some with silence, but all with the implicit understanding that something is happening in our skies that we do not have an explanation for.
And that's what kind of ties all these programs together. A recognition while the language changes, the sightings persist, and that no government anywhere in the world has been able to fully explain them.
Which brings us back full circle. Because if the US shut down Blue Book in 1969 and other nations kept going, then maybe the most enduring question isn't why did the investigation stop? It's who kept watching and what did they see next.
Okay, so after everything we've uncovered, from the beginning of Project Sign, through the peak years of Blue Book, into the quiet closure, and the rebirth of government interest decades later, the most astonishing thing isn't that the UFOs were investigated, is that they never stopped being a problem governments couldn't solve.
You know what I find hilarious?
Yeah,
At like close to the end to every one of our episodes, you're always like, ah, okay.
yeah, because we either in the Unreal we go through some crazy shit,
Yeah,
but in Unsolved you learn one more thing and you're like, what is happening?
yeah, exactly. Because because Blue Book didn't end the mystery. It just ended public facing investigation. And as we've seen, other countries kept looking, and new US programs emerged. And the sightings, the truly unexplainable ones, continued.
There's something deeply human about this search because the question is what's in our sky is also the question are we alone? And Blue Book, in all its bureaucracy and limitations, was one of the first times a modern government tried to answer that at scale and share the results, or at least part of them.
We saw how the Condon report gave Blue Book its final push towards closure, but how even scientists involved in that study later questioned its objectivity. We saw how respected figures like Dr. J. Allen Hynek went from debunker to believer, not in wild theories, but the legitimacy of the question itself.
And maybe that's like the real legacy of the Blue Book, right? It didn't confirm extraterrestrial, it didn't uncover alien technology, but it proved something was there. Something seen, reported, measured, but still unresolved. A pattern of encounters that persists across decades, across nations, and across generations of witnesses.
And we've learned that this isn't just a story about sightings, it's about secrecy, strategy, and sometimes silence. Because governments don't always hide information to deceive. Sometimes they do it because they don't have answers either.
So, where does that leave us today? We have declassified documents, we have pilot testimonies, we have Pentagon confirmed UAP footage. We even have active task force investigating aerial phenomena right now.
Serial killers.
But we still don't have clarity. Not about what's in our skies, Not about what we're prepared to do if we ever truly figure it out.
Maybe the most honest thing Project Blue Book gave us wasn't an answer. It was the question. It was a question. What happens when the systems we trust to investigate reality tell us that it's just not their concern anymore?
In the end, Project Blue Book didn't prove aliens are real, but it proved that the mystery is real, and that the unknown, whether technological, natural, or something far stranger, isn't just a story, it's documented.
So, whether you believe in extraterrestrials or just unexplained aerial technology, whether you think we're being watched or just misinterpreting our own sky, one thing is certain: we don't have the full story, and maybe we never will.
So this has been Unreal Unsolved episode 13, Project Blue Book and UFO cover-ups, declassified government files on UFO.
Next time, we'll flip the question entirely. We're talking everything from today's facts, and
Talking or taking?
we're taking everything from today's facts and spiraling into full unreal mode.
Because the Project Blue Book tried to answer what was in our skies. In the next episode, we ask, what if what's in our sky isn't from our reality at all?
We'll see you there, and until then, keep watching the skies.
Maybe you'll just see Venus. Bye
Bye.
bye.